Hi everyone, so this is my final project demonstration here. I did the guest Wi-Fi with captive portal and SMS authentication. So to give a little bit of a project overview here, I was required to implement a branded guest portal on our virtual WLC, the 9800, and then I also had to integrate kind of SMS one-time passcode authentication as a backend on top of just a simple guest portal. And I also had to enforce VLAN isolation. So as we go through this, I'll kind of show off each piece of that. So next is my addressing table here. So as you can see, I also have my VLANs listed here. So we have VLAN 10, which is our data VLAN, VLAN 11, which is our wireless management, VLAN 92, which is our guest wireless, VLAN 100, which is our employee wireless, and finally VLAN 255, which is our management VLAN. And if you take a look up at the addressing table here, I put the guest portal in our wired data VLAN and I gave it its own address. I did decide to keep the kind of, I guess, scheme that we were using in our previous labs where we put our group number in the third octet just to make it a little easier for me to identify. So next we have our topology here. So I kept a similar topology to our virtual WLC lab, but as you can see, we have our one router here that goes with a trunk link down to our switch, and the switch has two links, basically three links. One is for the access point, one is for a laptop, and finally we have one more trunk link that runs over to our ESXi. And the only thing I'm using the ESXi for is the actual WLC part of it, the virtual WLC. Otherwise, that's all I'm using it for. So next I kind of want to talk about the hardware that I used. So obviously, as I mentioned before, the Cisco 9800 virtual WLC. And then for the SMS authentication backend, I went ahead and got an Ubuntu VM running on VirtualBox to satisfy that. And then for the portals backend, I use Node.js within Linux. And then for the HTTPS reverse proxy, I used Nginx, Nginx. I'm not sure if I'm fully pronouncing that right. And then for dynamic client authorization, I ended up going with Radius COA. So before we go any further, I did just kind of want to talk about the one major problem that I came across when doing this project, and that was that there was no network access in the labs. So it didn't dawn on me right away, but I spent most of the week when I wasn't in the lab installing my VM, getting my code set up, getting that SMS authentication intertwined with my code. And to do the SMS authentication, I originally was going to use a service called Twilio. And essentially, what that does is that acts as the SMS. That'll act as kind of the SMS backend. But I set it up with set my account up with my phone number. This is the dashboard here. My account SID is here. My auth token is here, and I threw that into my code, and I had everything set up and ready to go. And then I realized that we had no network access in the lab. So just with how much time we had, I basically had to go and unfortunately scrap Twilio just because for testing purposes, I needed it to work. So I switched it to use an on-screen OTP just for testing purposes, so I can show you in my demos the successful authentication, and then if the authentication fails, you put in the wrong code. Okay, so now that we've moved past that, I kind of want to talk about the design of my portal. So basically, the way that it works is it's an external web auth that redirects from the WLC. So when a client connects up to the guest network and they open their browser, they will automatically be redirected to my page. And to do the splash page, I took the HTML file from the splash page lab and I tweaked it a little bit. I added my own color, I added my own stout branding to that to give it kind of its own uniqueness. And then, as I said before, the one-time passcode is generated and displayed on the splash screen just simply for testing purposes. Since because of that stout limitation, I couldn't make Twilio work. And then after a guest puts in the code entry, they are authorized via Radius. And each one-time passcode lasts for 5 minutes, and then you have to generate a new one. Okay, so this is my first demo I have here. So basically what this is going to show is me getting the backend going, and then connecting up to the network and authenticating with it. So basically when basically I'm just going to go ahead and show that. So let's get this demo started. So as you can see here, I'm going into my VM, opening up my terminal window, and then I'm going to cd into the guest portal directory that I made to house the backend. And then I'm just going to go ahead and open up my code just so you can see here. And this code remained the same. This is the code that I used when I implemented Twilio, and then once I figured out that it wasn't going to work, I went ahead and just removed all the instances of Twilio and set it up to have the passcode displayed on screen. And then a lot of this is just the personalization of it, the colors, the branding, everything like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start it up. And as you can see, the portal did start up and it's running on port 3000. So so since it's running on that port, the WLC and my VM are talking to each other, so that redirect is actually going to work. And I did configure Node to actually run this on startup. I just wanted to show me manually starting it for this instance. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to connect up to our guest Wi-Fi. And this might just take a second here. Okay, so we are now hooked up to it. So now if you open your browser, it's going to redirect you to my login page. So essentially then what I want you to do is type in your phone number, and normally then it would send the code through Twilio to the number that you entered. But since I couldn't get that to work because of the limitation, it just displays the code there. And if you enter in the wrong code, it does fail. You don't authenticate. So you do have to you do basically have to retry it. So you put in, the phone number that you want. And then in this case, you put in your code. And basically now you are connected. So you have been authenticated and connected. And you can now access the network resources. Oops. Alright, so now I just kind of want to talk about the security implementation. So to actually make this work, I created two ACLs. So I created a pre-auth guest ACL, and basically that's going to restrict what unauthorized guests can access, and it only allows DNS and DHCP traffic to go through to the portal server. And after that authentication happens, then I made a post-auth guest isolation ACL. And essentially that's going to block guest traffic from reaching any of the internal VLANs, which is including the employee wireless on VLAN 100 and the wired data VLAN. So before they authorize, guests are placed on VLAN 92, and essentially they cannot move laterally through the network at that point. And then I also set up SSL as well for the portal. Okay, so now this next demo is basically going to show the actual WLC dashboard. I'm going to go ahead and show the WebAuth as well as those ACLs. So if you go to WebAuth here, you can see that the redirect URL for login is my splash page. which is the one that is being housed through the Ubuntu VM, and then redirect on success is to that success page. I'm not sure why the redirect on failure isn't there. But then the portal IPv4 address down there is the IPv4 address of my Ubuntu VM. So it does prove that the WLC and my VM are talking to each other currently. So next I'm going to go ahead and go to my ACLs. And then you can see that that's the guest isolation one that basically doesn't allow you to browse on the net, or doesn't allow you to go on any of the other VLANs in the guest VLAN. And then the pre-auth guest ACL, that's the one that actually keeps you on that VLAN 92 until you authenticate. Okay. So next I just kind of want to talk about some challenges here. So the project really came with several challenges for me. One of the main challenges I faced was actually getting my VM and the WLC to talk to each other. I had quite a few issues with that. So basically, I thought I had it set up correctly with my adapter settings, and essentially I could not ping my gateway. I couldn't ping anything throughout the network. And so I spent actually a few hours trying to figure this out, doing a lot of research. And essentially what I ended up figuring out was that I had the correct adapter selected that was attached to my computer, but I did not have the correct adapter type selected. So basically I had to switch it to, VirtualBox calls it the VIRTIO net adapter within its settings, within the VM settings, and once I did that, then it actually allowed me to fully connect. I was able to ping my gateway, I was able to ping the WLC, and that established that connection between the two devices. And then obviously, as I said before, the biggest challenge was not having internet access in the lab. That really kind of put a damper in my project. If I had more time and I was able to get approval from Stout to have internet access, then I would have fully been able to implement the Twilio. But just for the testing purposes and the time we had, it was probably better to show the on-screen passcodes, so that way then we could prove that it actually authenticates correctly and everything. And then also another thing that I ran into was the node radius library in the VM had compatibility issues, and so I ended up having to write a custom radius CLA implementation. And then finally, my final challenge that I had was I had some trouble with the redirects after putting in the codes. So after doing that, I would get a error on my browser. So what I ended up having to do was put in that I didn't have the pre-auth ACL set up correctly. And once I set that up that magically fixed it. So then after I did that, I was able to authenticate correctly. And if I put in the wrong code, it would fail correctly rather than give me a bunch of error code. Okay, so to conclude here, I think I successfully deployed a functional guest portal that kind of went beyond the basic lab requirements. I integrated the authentication backend with the OTP flow. If we didn't have the network restriction, I would have been able to get Twilio fully working. But since that limitation was there, I wasn't fully able to implement the real authentication. But you can see, you can kind of see the back end of it and how it's supposed to work, even if you are seeing the codes on screen. And then I went ahead and got that enforced segmentation. And then some skills that I gained, I think, from this were just kind of advanced configurations on the WLC. That Node.js backend experience, typing up all that code, that took a lot of research, and getting the splash page up and running. Some radius configuration on the WLC, and finally a lot of Linux networking experience trying to troubleshoot those network issues. So that's all I have. I really hope that you enjoyed listening to my presentation, and I really hope that you liked my splash screen with the authentication.